The ice cream truck in our neighborhood plays music at 2 a.m. I followed it one night and wish I hadn't. The tinkling melody first woke me on a Thursday in late September, drifting through my bedroom window like a fever dream. I lay there listening to "Turkey in the Straw" echo between the houses, checking my phone's glowing display. 2:17 a.m. Ice cream trucks don't run at 2 a.m. They don't cruise empty suburban streets when every child is asleep, when every parent would question the sanity of buying frozen treats in the middle of the night. But there it was, that familiar carnival tune growing louder as it approached our cul-de-sac, then fading as it continued down Maple Avenue toward the elementary school. I convinced myself I'd been dreaming until my neighbor Kevin mentioned it the next morning, while we both retrieved our newspapers from identical driveways. "You hear that ice cream truck last night?" Kevin asked, squinting against the morning sun. His usually perfect lawn showed brown patches from the early autumn drought, and I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded the local section. Kevin worked nights at the hospital, so he was often awake when the rest of us were sleeping. "Came through around 2 a.m. playing that creepy music. Third time this week." He paused, glancing toward where our street connected to the main road. "My daughter Chloe heard it too. She's been asking if she can buy ice cream from the midnight truck. I told her absolutely not, but you know how kids are. They get ideas." Something in his voice carried more than casual annoyance. Kevin was protective of 8-year-old Chloe since his divorce, maybe overprotective, but this felt different. This felt like fear disguised as parental concern. I started paying attention after that conversation, keeping my bedroom window cracked open despite the September chill. The truck came every night at almost exactly the same time, always playing the same melody, always following the same route through our neighborhood. Maple Avenue to Pine Street, down Pine to the elementary school, then a slow loop around the playground before disappearing toward the highway. The whole circuit took maybe 15 minutes. I timed it with my phone, documenting the pattern like I was conducting some kind of amateur investigation. By the second week, I realized other neighbors were noticing too. Mrs. Chen from the corner house mentioned it during our impromptu homeowners association meeting about the broken streetlight. "It's disturbing the peace," she said, her thin lips pressed together in disapproval. "Who runs an ice cream business at that hour?" But when I suggested we call the police to report a noise complaint, the conversation suddenly shifted to other topics. Nobody wanted to be the person who called the cops on an ice cream truck. The first time I saw the truck itself, I understood why people seemed reluctant to discuss it openly. I was returning from a late shift at the warehouse, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I turned onto Maple Avenue around 1:45 a.m. The ice cream truck sat parked beneath the broken streetlight, its white exterior almost glowing in my high beams. But something was wrong with the picture. The truck was too clean, too perfect, like it had just rolled off a factory floor. No dents, no rust, no faded paint or scratched windows. The cartoon ice cream cones painted on its sides looked fresh and bright, their colors unnaturally vivid in the darkness. Most disturbing was the complete absence of any identifying information. No company name, no phone number, no health department certificates visible through the serving window. Just a pristine white truck with cheerful decorations and that haunting melody beginning to play as I watched. The music box mechanism seemed to activate by itself, the tune starting softly and building to full volume as my headlights illuminated the vehicle. I parked in my driveway and watched from behind my steering wheel as the truck began its nightly route. It moved slowly, almost ceremonially, through each street with mechanical precision. Every turn was exactly 90 degrees. Every speed was identical. At each corner, the truck would pause for exactly 30 seconds before continuing, as if following a programmed sequence rather than human decision-making. Through my windshield, I tried to see into the driver's cabin, but the windows were tinted too dark to reveal any occupant. The truck could have been operating autonomously for all I could tell, guided by some invisible hand through our sleeping neighborhood. When it reached the elementary school, it performed 3 complete circuits around the playground equipment before stopping directly in front of the main building. The music continued playing for another 5 minutes while the truck sat motionless, its headlights aimed at the school's front entrance. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the melody stopped and the truck drove away into the night, leaving only the echo of "Turkey in the Straw" hanging in the cool air. The next morning, I walked my usual route to the coffee shop and deliberately passed by Riverside Elementary to see if anything looked different in daylight. The school appeared completely normal, with children arriving for classes and teachers directing traffic in the parking lot, but I noticed something that made my skin crawl. On the playground asphalt, Directly beneath where the ice cream truck had been parked, someone had drawn 3 white circles in chalk. They were perfectly round, each about 3 feet in diameter, arranged in a triangle formation. The chalk was still fresh, bright white against the dark pavement, and none of the teachers seemed to notice or care about the markings. Children ran over them during recess, obliterating parts of the circles with their sneakers, but the basic shapes remained visible throughout the day. I took photos with my phone, zooming in on the precise geometric patterns. They looked deliberate, purposeful, like symbols, rather than random playground art. That afternoon I searched online for any meaning behind 3 white circles, but found only vague references to meditation practices and abstract art installations. Kevin's behavior started changing around the 3rd week of the ice cream truck visits. During our morning newspaper routine, he seemed increasingly agitated, constantly checking his watch and scanning the street as if expecting something to happen. His hands shook more noticeably, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he wasn't sleeping well despite working night shifts. "Chloe's been having nightmares," he told me on Friday morning, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says the ice cream man is calling her name through her bedroom window. She describes him in detail, but when I ask what he looks like, she can't remember anything except his voice. She says he sounds like someone she knows, someone she trusts, but she can't place who." Kevin's revelation sent ice water through my veins. Children don't typically invent such specific details about imaginary threats. If Chloe was dreaming about someone calling her name, someone whose voice sounded familiar but unidentifiable, then the midnight ice cream truck was affecting more than just adult sleep patterns. I started researching ice cream truck regulations and licensing requirements for our county, diving deep into municipal codes and business permits. What I discovered made the midnight visitor even more mysterious. According to local ordinances, ice cream trucks were required to display valid health permits, business licenses, and contact information at all times. They were prohibited from operating before 10 a.m. or after 9 p.m. in residential areas. Most importantly, every licensed ice cream vendor in our county was registered in a public database that included vehicle descriptions, route assignments, and owner contact information. I searched through every entry in the database, cross-referencing white trucks with music boxes, but found nothing that matched the vehicle prowling our neighborhood. The midnight ice cream truck wasn't just violating noise ordinances or operating outside permitted hours. It didn't exist in any official capacity, which meant whoever was driving it was operating completely outside the legal system. This wasn't a legitimate business making poor scheduling choices. This was something else entirely. Armed with this information, I finally called the non-emergency police line to report an unlicensed commercial vehicle disturbing the peace. The dispatcher took my information with professional courtesy, asking for details about the truck's appearance and route. When I mentioned the 2 a.m. timing and lack of visible permits, her tone became more serious. "We've had a few calls about unusual ice cream truck activity," she said, and I could hear typing in the background. "An officer will patrol the area tonight and investigate. Please call back if you see the vehicle again." But something in her voice suggested this wasn't the first time she'd fielded calls about midnight ice cream trucks. The way she said unusual activity carried implications that went beyond simple noise complaints. I wondered how many other neighborhoods had reported similar incidents, and whether our little cul-de-sac was part of a larger pattern that authorities were already tracking. That night, I positioned myself at my bedroom window with a pair of binoculars and my phone ready to record video evidence. The police patrol car had made 2 passes through our neighborhood between midnight and 1 a.m., but I hadn't seen it since then. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the familiar melody began playing from somewhere near the highway entrance. I focused the binoculars on Maple Avenue and watched the pristine white truck materialize from the darkness, moving with that same mechanical precision I'd observed before. But this time, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The truck wasn't alone. Following about 50 yards behind was a dark sedan with its headlights turned off, creeping along at the same deliberate pace as the ice cream truck. Through the binoculars, I could see the sedan contained at least 2 occupants, though the darkness made it impossible to identify faces or features. The sedan maintained its distance throughout the truck's entire route, never getting closer or falling farther behind, like a shadow vehicle providing escort or surveillance services. When the ice cream truck reached the elementary school for its ritual 3 circuits around the playground, the sedan parked across the street with a clear view of the building. I watched through my binoculars as someone in the passenger seat raised what appeared to be a camera or recording device, documenting the truck's activities at the school. The coordination between the two vehicles was too precise to be coincidental. This wasn't a rogue ice cream vendor making eccentric business decisions. This was an organized operation involving multiple people and vehicles, all focused on our neighborhood's elementary school. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, but by the time I managed to dial, both vehicles had disappeared into the night. The whole encounter had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it fundamentally changed my understanding of what we were dealing with. The midnight ice cream truck wasn't just disturbing our sleep, it was conducting surveillance on our children's school. The next morning brought devastating news that connected all the pieces in the worst possible way. Kevin was waiting for me in his driveway, holding a crumpled piece of paper and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Chloe's missing," he said, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. "She was in her room when I got home from work at 6 a.m. I checked on her like I always do. But when I went to wake her for school at 7:30, she was gone. Windows still locked from the inside, front doors still chained, but she's not in the house anywhere." He handed me the paper he'd been clutching. It was a hand-drawn picture in crayon, showing a white ice cream truck with a smiling stick figure man standing beside it. At the bottom, in Chloe's careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "The ice cream man wants to be my friend." The drawing was dated 3 days ago, which meant Chloe had been thinking about the midnight truck long enough to create artistic representations of her fantasies. Kevin's hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the paper steady. I called 911 immediately while Kevin contacted his ex-wife and started organizing a neighborhood search. Within 30 minutes, our quiet cul-de-sac was swarming with police vehicles, K9 units, and grim-faced detectives who asked pointed questions about recent unusual activity. When I mentioned the midnight ice cream truck and the surveillance sedan, Detective Ramirez pulled me aside for a private conversation. "We've been tracking similar incidents across 3 counties, she said, her expression dark with professional concern. "Ice cream trucks operating at unusual hours near elementary schools, always followed by reports of missing children within 48 hours. This appears to be a coordinated operation using the trucks to identify target locations and conduct reconnaissance." She paused, studying my face for reaction. "The good news is that we've recovered most of the missing children unharmed. They're being used for something, but they're usually returned within a week, though they remember nothing about their absence. The bad news is that we haven't caught the perpetrators, and they seem to be expanding their territory." Detective Ramirez showed me photos from other neighborhoods where similar incidents had occurred. Each location featured the same elements: pristine white ice cream truck, surveillance vehicle, mysterious chalk markings at local schools, and missing children who returned with gaps in their memory. The victims were always between ages 6 and 10, always taken from their bedrooms without forcing entry, and always returned to different locations within a week of their disappearance. Medical examinations revealed no signs of physical abuse, but psychological evaluations suggested the children had experienced some form of controlled environment or structured routine during their absence. "We think they're being held in a facility designed to mimic a normal living situation," Detective Ramirez explained. "The children describe comfortable rooms, regular meals, educational activities, and adult supervision, but they can't remember faces, names, or specific locations. It's like their short-term memories have been selectively edited." The implications were terrifying. Someone had developed a system for temporarily kidnapping children while leaving minimal psychological trauma, suggesting resources and expertise far beyond typical criminal operations. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source during the second day of Chloe's disappearance. Mrs. Chen from the corner house approached Detective Ramirez with information she'd been reluctant to share. "My grandson Tommy visits every weekend," she said, her accented English precise despite her obvious nervousness. 2 weeks ago, he told me he followed the ice cream truck one night when he couldn't sleep. He's a curious boy, always exploring where he shouldn't." Mrs. Chen handed the detective a notebook filled with a 10-year-old's careful handwriting and sketched maps. Tommy had documented the ice cream truck's route beyond our neighborhood, following it for nearly 2 miles to an abandoned summer camp in the state forest. According to his notes, the truck had driven directly to a maintenance building that should have been locked and unused, but showed clear signs of recent activity. Lights were on inside, vehicles were parked nearby, and Tommy had observed adults moving equipment between buildings. Most importantly, he'd heard children's voices coming from what should have been an empty facility. Detective Ramirez immediately organized a multi-agency raid on the abandoned summer camp, coordinating with FBI agents who'd been tracking similar operations in neighboring states. I was allowed to accompany the law enforcement convoy as a witness, partly because my testimony about the surveillance activities had been crucial to obtaining search warrants. The drive to the camp took us through increasingly remote forest roads until we reached a gate marked with faded "no trespassing" signs and rusted chains that had clearly been cut and replaced recently. Beyond the gate, a cluster of weathered buildings surrounded a central courtyard where the pristine white ice cream truck sat parked alongside 3 dark sedans and a modified school bus. The facility looked like summer camp during off-season, but subtle modifications revealed its true purpose. Windows had been covered with one-way reflective film, doors featured electronic locks instead of standard hardware, and discrete security cameras monitored all approaches to the buildings. Inside the main lodge, we found a sophisticated operation that defied every assumption about typical kidnapping scenarios. The facility had been converted into what could only be described as a children's educational center, complete with classrooms, recreational areas, sleeping quarters, and a full-service kitchen. 12 children between ages 6 and 11, including Chloe, were engaged in structured learning activities under the supervision of adults wearing matching polo shirts and name tags. The children appeared healthy, well-fed, and genuinely engaged with their lessons, showing no obvious signs of distress or captivity. When Detective Ramirez announced that parents had come to retrieve them, several children seemed confused and disappointed about leaving. "We're not finished with our projects yet," one boy protested, holding up an elaborate science experiment involving crystals and chemical solutions. Mr. Davidson said we could present our findings to the review board tomorrow. The children's casual familiarity with their supervisors and genuine enthusiasm for their activities suggested they believed they were participating in some kind of special educational program. The adults supervising the children were equally confusing in their apparent normalcy and professional demeanor. Each possessed valid teaching credentials, clean background checks, and employment histories with legitimate educational institutions. When questioned, they insisted they believed they were operating a gifted and talented summer enrichment program for academically advanced children whose parents had enrolled them voluntarily. They produced detailed enrollment forms, parent contact information, and signed permission slips that appeared authentic until closer investigation revealed they were elaborate forgeries. The forgeries were so sophisticated they had fooled experienced educators into believing they were conducting legitimate educational services. "We thought we were providing accelerated learning opportunities for gifted children," explained Mr. Davidson, the lead instructor, his confusion apparently genuine. "The program coordinator told us these children needed intensive academic stimulation during off hours because their regular schools couldn't meet their intellectual needs. We never questioned the unusual scheduling or transportation arrangements because we believed we were serving students who required specialized attention." Detective Ramirez separated the children from their teachers for individual interviews, trying to understand how they'd been recruited and transported to the facility. What emerged was a pattern of sophisticated psychological manipulation targeting both children and their families. The children described receiving special invitations to participate in a midnight academy for exceptionally bright students, delivered through their bedroom windows by friendly adults who knew their names, favorite subjects, and academic achievements. The invitations had included official-looking documents, promising accelerated learning, college preparation, and special recognition for academic excellence. Most disturbing was that each child remembered willingly leaving their homes with these recruiters, convinced they were beginning an exclusive educational opportunity that would give them advantages over their peers. "The ice cream truck was just for transportation," Chloe explained to Detective Ramirez, her 8-year-old voice matter-of-fact. "Mr. Davidson said it was more fun than regular school buses, and it helped keep the program secret so other kids wouldn't get jealous about not being selected." The investigation revealed a criminal enterprise unlike anything law enforcement had previously encountered. The operation's masterminds had identified academically gifted children through systematic monitoring of school records, standardized test scores, and teacher recommendations. They'd developed detailed psychological profiles of target families, identifying children who were intellectually curious, academically ambitious, or felt unchallenged by their regular educational environments. The recruitment process involved months of preparation, including surveillance of family routines, analysis of parent-child relationships, and identification of optimal approach strategies for each target. The ice cream truck served as both surveillance platform and recruitment vehicle, allowing the criminals to observe neighborhoods, identify potential victims, and establish familiarity with children who might otherwise be suspicious of strangers. The chalk markings at schools were apparently signals to indicate surveillance progress and target selection, part of a coded communication system between team members. The scope of the operation extended far beyond our local neighborhood, involving multiple teams operating across several states, with military-level coordination and resources. FBI investigators found evidence of similar facilities in at least 6 other locations, each targeting academically gifted children for temporary recruitment into intensive educational programs. The children were held for periods ranging from 3 days to 2 weeks before being returned to their families with carefully constructed cover stories and selective memory gaps induced through a combination of mild sedatives and psychological conditioning techniques. Physical evidence suggested the operation had been running for at least 3 years, with hundreds of children cycled through the various facilities without their parents ever knowing they'd been missing. The sophistication required for such an enterprise indicated significant financial backing, professional expertise, and institutional connections that went far beyond typical criminal organizations. The most disturbing revelation came when investigators analyzed the educational materials and curriculum being taught at the facilities. Rather than legitimate academic enrichment, the children were being exposed to advanced concepts in computer programming, cryptography, social manipulation, and information gathering techniques. The lesson plans resembled training programs for intelligence operatives rather than educational content appropriate for elementary school students. The children had been learning to hack computer systems, decode encrypted messages, manipulate adults through psychological pressure, and gather information from seemingly innocent conversations. Each child's progress was being carefully documented and evaluated, with detailed reports on their aptitude for various skills that would be valuable to criminal or espionage organizations. The entire operation appeared designed to identify and groom academically gifted children for recruitment into illegal activities that would utilize their exceptional intellectual abilities. Detective Ramirez explained the implications during a briefing for parents whose children had been recovered from the facility. Your children were being evaluated for potential recruitment into a criminal organization that specializes in intellectual crimes, she said, her words carefully chosen to minimize panic while conveying the seriousness of the situation. The perpetrators were identifying children with exceptional cognitive abilities and testing their susceptibility to manipulation and their aptitude for activities like computer hacking, social engineering, and information theft. The good news is that the recruitment process was still in early stages, and none of the children appear to have been used for actual criminal activities. The bad news is that this represents a completely new model of criminal recruitment that we're still working to understand and prevent. She paused, studying the faces of parents who were struggling to process the idea that their children's academic gifts had made them targets for criminal exploitation. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the sophisticated nature of the criminal enterprise and the genuine confusion of many participants who believed they were involved in legitimate educational activities. The teachers and support staff were ultimately determined to be victims of an elaborate deception rather than willing participants in child exploitation. They had been recruited through fake educational organizations, provided with forged documentation, and convinced they were conducting authorized academic programs. The true masterminds of the operation remained largely invisible, operating through layers of front companies, stolen identities, and criminal intermediaries who had limited knowledge of the overall structure. Federal prosecutors faced the challenge of building cases against suspects who had covered their tracks with professional-level operational security and whose criminal activities didn't fit established legal precedents for child exploitation or educational fraud. Kevin and Chloe underwent extensive counseling to process the psychological impact of her disappearance and recruitment experience. Despite the relatively benign nature of her treatment at the facility, Chloe struggled with feelings of betrayal and confusion about adults she had trusted and enjoyed learning from. She had genuinely believed she was participating in a special program that recognized her academic abilities, and learning that it was actually a criminal operation damaged her trust in educational authority figures and special opportunities. Kevin blamed himself for not taking the midnight ice cream truck more seriously, convinced that earlier intervention might have prevented Chloe's recruitment. The guilt was eating him alive, manifesting in insomnia, anxiety attacks, and obsessive security measures around their home. Family therapy sessions revealed the deep psychological scars left by an operation specifically designed to exploit the natural trust between children and educational mentors. 6 months after the raid on the summer camp facility, our neighborhood had returned to an uneasy normalcy punctuated by heightened security awareness and lingering anxiety about future threats. The ice cream truck no longer made midnight visits, and legitimate ice cream vendors were required to display enhanced identification and operate only during approved hours. Parents had organized neighborhood watch programs, invested in home security systems, and maintained closer supervision of their children's activities and whereabouts. But the underlying vulnerability remained. Academic excellence was still being monitored and evaluated by school systems. Standardized testing continued to identify intellectually gifted children, and the same psychological factors that had made these children attractive targets for criminal recruitment were still present in their personalities and family dynamics. The operation had been disrupted rather than eliminated, and law enforcement warnings suggested that similar criminal enterprises would likely emerge in other locations using refined techniques based on lessons learned from this investigation. The lasting impact on our community went beyond individual trauma to fundamental questions about how society identifies, nurtures, and protects academically gifted children. The criminal operation had succeeded precisely because it had mimicked legitimate educational opportunities and exploited the natural desire of parents and children to pursue academic excellence. It had turned our children's greatest strengths into vulnerabilities and weaponized our educational aspirations against our families. Moving forward required balancing the desire to nurture our children's intellectual gifts with awareness that those same gifts made them targets for sophisticated criminal operations that viewed exceptional minds as valuable resources to be harvested and exploited. Detective Ramirez called me 1 year later with an update that provided both closure and renewed concern. The investigation had expanded to include international connections, revealing a global network of criminal organizations specializing in the identification and recruitment of intellectually gifted children for various illegal purposes. Several key suspects had been arrested, but the decentralized nature of the operation meant that new cells continued to emerge in different locations. The midnight ice cream truck had been just one recruitment method among many, and law enforcement agencies were now tracking similar operations using school buses, tutoring services, academic competitions, and online educational platforms. The threat has evolved, she explained, but so has our understanding of how to recognize and prevent these recruitment attempts. Your community's experience helped us develop new protocols that are being implemented nationwide. Today, Chloe is a bright, resilient teenager who channels her academic gifts into computer science and cybersecurity studies, determined to help protect other children from the kind of exploitation she experienced. She speaks at law enforcement training seminars about recognizing recruitment tactics and works with educational institutions to develop safeguards against criminal infiltration of academic programs. The midnight ice cream truck music still sometimes echoes in my dreams, but it no longer carries the power to terrorize our neighborhood because we understand what it represented and how to recognize similar threats before they can target our children. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.